Hi everybody and a happy new year. Welcome back to Murder at Bedtime. It seems like ages. If you're a returning subscriber, you know I think you are all awesome. And if this is your first time, I hope I can persuade you to stay and maybe subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the holidays. How many of you are still sticking to your New Year's resolutions? Mine lasted a whole 3 days. Anyway, it's back to business. This is a 10 to 20 minute true crime bedtime story. I try to research it as much as I possibly can, then I chuck out all the boring bits, scrunch it all up like a scrapyard crusher, and hopefully put it out all condensed into an enjoyable, waffle-free, no-frills bedtime story. So if you are ready for a story of murder, mayhem, and a mystic chicken, let's get into the story of the Yorkshire witch, Mary Bateman. It was 1806 in Bramley in Yorkshire, England, and business owner William Perigo was very worried about his wife Rebecca. She had started to have a fluttering of the heart when she laid down, but also she was having nightmares, mostly about a big black dog, and was convinced that she had had a curse put upon her by a neighbour. Now, we have no idea which neighbour or why they would have put a hex on the unfortunate Rebecca, but they had decided to visit their local doctor about it, who very helpfully informed the couple that yes, it's definitely a curse, and way beyond my help, you will need sorcery to remove the symptoms. Now, the Perigos didn't happen to know any local wizards or witches, but fortunately for them, they had a niece who regularly visited from Leeds, a large city in the same county. She listened intently to the story of her aunt's plight and told them that she knew of a wise woman in Leeds who might be able to help them. Straight away, the Perigos were very interested indeed and asked if their niece might visit this wise woman on their behalf and ask if she might be able to help them. She readily agreed, and so it was that she shortly after arrived at, ironically, Black Dog Lane to talk to this wise woman, soothsayer and charm and spellmaker, Mary Bateman. Mary listened to the Perigos' niece's tale and then informed her that she was in fact just a conduit and worked for a much higher power, who she referred to as her oracle, a Mrs. Blythe who lived in Scarborough on the Yorkshire coast. And if the niece would return to Bramley and ask the Perigos to bring an article of clothing of her aunt's that had been worn next to the skin, she would send it on to Mrs. Blythe and await her instructions on what would be the best course of action to rid Rebecca Perigo of her curse. Now, when William heard this from his niece, he was overjoyed and set off straight away with one of his wife's flannel petticoats, which Mary Bateman told him she would send off to Mrs. Blythe immediately, and for him to call back in exactly 1 week's time to see if the lady had indeed replied. In exactly 7 days, William was back at Mary Bateman's, where she told him she had indeed received a reply from her oracle. The mysterious Mrs. Blythe of Scarborough, who on receiving and laying hands on the petticoat had sent instruction to Mary Bateman on how to combat Rebecca's evil curse. Mary read out the letter to William that instructed that Mary take the 4 guineas in notes and gold coins that the oracle had posted to her, and for them to be sewn into individual silk purses and placed into the 4 corners of the bed Rebecca Perigo slept in, and to be left there for a period of no less than 18 months. William Perigo was to give Mary 4 guinea notes to replace the money Mrs. Blythe had blessed, and that was to be put into the silk purses by Mary, and the money then to be sent on to Scarborough. William was told If all parts of the agreement were not met, then the charm would not work. And so it was a week later, Mary turned up in Bramley at the Perigos with the 4 silk purses that she had sewn the money into. She left with the 4 guineas, and with a cheery wave and the promise that Mrs. Blythe would be in touch, she was gone. And Mrs. Blythe, true to her word, was very soon in touch. In fact, she was in touch from August 1806 to May 1807, demanding more money and household goods for more silk purses and more charms. In this way, Mrs. Blythe accumulated more than £70 in cash, nearly £8,000 in today's money, as well as items such as silver teaspoons, china, a camp bed and mattress, and cheese. Yes, cheese. Then in May 1807, the Perigos did not send the agreed items punctually, which seems to have irked the oracle somewhat, and Mrs. Blythe, through Mary, told the Perigos very worryingly that they were going to get very ill. In Rebecca's case, this meant iller, and not something you want to hear when you've been shelling out for all these silk purses full of money and all the other bits and bobs. This illness, apparently, was what God had in store for them. And if they didn't follow Mrs. Blythe's instructions to the letter, then basically they were going to die. Now, you might be thinking, as I was, that the Perigos thought, oh, come on, no way, there's something fishy going on here. But no, not the Perigos. Not even when Mary Bateman produced some sachets of powder sent by Mrs. Blythe with the instructions that every day they must mix a sachet of powder in with their pudding for 6 days and eat it all. They could not let anyone else, even animals, eat the pudding. They had to destroy any leftovers. They were not allowed to consult a doctor, and they must destroy all instructions that they had been given. Nope. William and Rebecca just ate their pudding. For 5 days, nothing really bad happened, but on the 6th day, Rebecca was violently ill. William wasn't so bad, because he just couldn't manage more than a couple of spoonfuls. On the final day, so wasn't as badly affected. But anyway, Mrs. Blythe kindly had sent a honey mixture which would combat these side effects. Unfortunately, this failed, because on Sunday the 24th of May 1807, Rebecca Perigo died. An agonising death, her tongue swollen and her face frighteningly distorted. Now, this is where William now goes to the authorities, demanding that a Mrs. Blythe from Scarborough be arrested immediately for murdering his wife and attempting to murder him. No, not this Willie. He amazingly carried on consulting with Mary Bateman and the elusive Mrs. Blythe about the failure of the spells and charms, and continued to give Mary things that Mrs. Blythe demanded, including his late wife's dresses. But with all this giving money and gifts to the oracle, William Perigo had started to feel the pinch. He was running out of money fast. So much so he decided to use the special money that was in the silk purses dotted all over his bed. Now, why he hadn't done this as soon as his wife died, because clearly the charms hadn't worked, we will never know. But anyway, he started to unpick them, and to his horror, they contained nothing more than scrunched up old paper, rusty old pennies and cabbage leaves. All of a sudden, at last, William Perigo had that light bulb moment, and off he trotted to the police station. He then went to Black Dog Lane to see Mary Bateman to pick up some more powders, but he also took a police constable with him, who hid outside until Mary gave William the poisoned powder. He then entered the house, arrested her and took the powder away for analysis. Mary tried to make out that William had in fact tried to frame her and had given her the powder just before the constable entered the house. A search of the aforementioned house also found a great many of the items given to Mary to forward to Mrs. Blythe. The analysis of the powder showed it to contain mercuric chloride. Then Mary's house of cards collapsed. Mrs. Blythe, of course, never existed. All the letters written were from Mary, as I'm sure you have already guessed. So, before we go to Mary's trial, who was she? Well, she was born Mary Harker in 1768 in Asenby near Thirsk in Yorkshire to a very respectable, decent farming family. She had a pretty good upbringing, learning to read and write, which was a bonus in those times. But unfortunately, from a very young age, Mary liked taking things that didn't belong to her. In desperation, when she was 12, her mother and father sent her out to work in service as a maid to a family in Thirsk. But she couldn't control her sticky fingers and was fired from her position. This happened time and time again until she was pretty much unemployable in the Thirsk area. So she upped sticks and moved to the city of Leeds, where she became a seamstress, and a good one apparently. But it didn't pay enough, so she turned her hand to becoming a fortune teller. A wise woman who could mix spells and make charms, who could break curses and ward off evil. And she started to find some fame in the area. At one time, she made quite a lot of money out of a chicken that she kept. She named the prophet hen of Leeds. This hen laid eggs with the words, "Christ is coming," etched on the shell. People flocked from near and far to see the fortune-telling hen, and by paying Mary a penny a time, she promised them that they would be protected from the upcoming apocalypse. Little did they know that Mary was etching the freshly laid eggs with vinegar, then shoving them back up the startled hen's oviduct to be relayed for the chicken's adoring fans. Eventually, the ruse was apparently uncovered by a local doctor, but Mary appears to have gone unpunished. The hen was rehomed and no more magic eggs were laid. In between all her stealing and scams, Mary had managed to find time to marry a wheelwright called John Bateman in 1792 after a 3-week whirlwind romance, and they had 4 children together. Whether John knew about all of Mary's scams and cons isn't made clear, but he did know on many occasions that they had to up sticks and get out of Dodge fast. At one point, John joined the supplementary militia, a sort of early-day territorial army, and got Mary and himself out of the city for a couple of years. But by the early 19th century, they were back in Leeds on Black Dog Lane, where Mary was now using her Mrs. Blythe ruse. At her trial at York Castle in March 1809, it was claimed that Mary was also responsible for the poisoning of 2 Quaker sisters and their mother who lived above a draper's shop in St. Peter's Square. When they died, Mary allegedly made off with their belongings, telling neighbours that they had died of bubonic plague. Mary wasn't even questioned, and it was never followed up on. The trial only lasted 11 hours and the jury took just minutes to find Mary guilty. When the judge asked her if there was any reason why he should not impose a sentence of death on her, she immediately declared that she was pregnant. Mary was in fact still breastfeeding her youngest child, who was staying with her in her cell. Anyway, with the news of her pregnancy, the judge ordered a panel of matrons to be drawn from the courthouse. Now apparently this was standard practice in those times, where 12 married women, presumably who had had children, would take her to another room and inspect Mary's body and question her to ascertain if she was indeed with child. They found she was not, and Mary was sentenced to death by hanging at York Castle in 3 days' time. Now at 5 a.m. on the 20th of March 1809, she was hanged in front of a crowd of some 20,000 people by the hangman John Mutton Curry. Her body hung for an hour before being cut down and escorted by horse-drawn hearse the 23 miles to Leeds, where 2,500 people waited patiently. They had paid threepence each to view the body of the Yorkshire witch, after which she was dissected over 3 days by Surgeon William Hay to paying members of the public, medical students and distinguished gentlemen. After that, she was skinned, her skin scraped and tanned and cut into strips, whereas was customary, it was sold off as Lucky Charms to ghoulish souvenir hunters. Up until 2015, a large portion of Mary's skeleton was on display at the Thackeray Museum in Leeds, but now resides in private storage at Leeds University. Well, that was definitely a strange one, but at least for a change, there seems no doubt about her guilt, even though she refused to admit the murder of Rebecca Perigo, even at the very end. Well, it was nice to be back. I hope you found this story interesting. If you did, if you could give it a like and subscribe and ding the little bell to receive further notifications of episodes, that would be amazing, as it really does help the channel get out there. If you would like to send me a message, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook as Murder at Bedtime with Lyndon, or on the comments on here. So please drop me a line. And with that, thank you for watching. Have a great new year and see you on the next one. Bye for now.